Yes, you read that title correctly. When I was 14, I watched and read Lord of the Rings for the first time, and it made me a child fascist. I'm not really sure where to start explaining such an explosive revelation about myself, but I'll try to walk it from the very beginning. Now, when I say a child fascist, mind you, it's not like I realized it at the time. I just did so in recent years as I became an adult and got more familiar with history and psychology, and with this current knowledge, I remembered in retrospect how these films and books made me feel. And the most basic way to describe it is precisely fascism. To get this out of the way, since nowadays everyone throws the term fascism around, what do I mean by it? I mean it in the literal governance sense. A form of rule that is unapologetically maniacal and dictatorial in its exertion of power, that does not tolerate any kind of defiance or deviance. It also maniacally worships and follows one sole individual, and exterminates anything that stands in their way, not only without remorse, but also with the attitude that the extermination of opposition is something necessary and even encouraged. So yes, this is the kind of fascism I'm talking about. And this is the form of fascism that had taken over me at 14 years old. And the big question is, how the fuck did this happen? And from the Lord of the Rings, these films and books are meant to teach people about kindness and goodness and charity and never losing hope in the face of fear. And instead, they made me a child fascist? What kind of a psycho kid must I have been? And when I think about it now, the answer is very weird and simple at the same time. I wasn't an evil psycho kid. On the contrary, I was actually an exceedingly good kid. I did well in school, I did what I was told, always abiding by teachers and parents, always trying to stay out of trouble, never wanting to make a fuss about anything. I was never interested in fucking around or doing drugs, just always in my own little bubble of nerdy passions. At first sight, there was nothing wrong with me, but, and this is where I think the source was, I was really vulnerable on a psychological level, because I come from a dysfunctional family, meaning violent alcoholics, constant money struggles, pent-up emotions, different levels of physical and emotional abuse, absentee parents, constant changes of schools, this kind of thing. So overall, even despite all of that, I was a good kid and a genuinely good person. However, these life struggles also made me vulnerable in the sense that I was a blank slate for anything radical to consume me. Because even though I didn't openly rebel, I wasn't happy with my status quo, and if anything came along that made me feel real happiness and fulfillment, I was open and willing to accept it. And this something came along in the form of Isengard and the figure of Saruman the White. Anyone who knew me at the time can confirm that I was maniacal about the Lord of the Rings in general, but more specifically about Isengard. Everything about it, from the characters to the type of works, to the architecture, to the philosophy, especially as it was shown in the movies. I was nuts about Christopher Lee's representation, his voice and the way he carried himself, and his power of controlling people through a combination of oratory with clever wording, but also the power of his literal physical voice, similar to the Bene Gesserit in Dune, which I was reading at the same time. I was literally training my own voice to be lower and more basso in order to mimic him. In terms of Isengardian philosophy, I was nuts about the idea that nature sucks and it should only be used to, quote, fuel the furnaces of industry. I was crazy about the idea of intellectualism and sheer science and reason in contrast to vague morals and ideals of goodness and beauty. As in, Saruman was like a scientist, building machines and bombs, always reading his books and doing his research. And on the other hand, you had Gandalf and the hobbits with their stupid little ideas of hope and friendship and whatever. You literally had the power of brains versus the power of the heart, and I loved that. And I guess it was because at the time, emotions and the heart were always hurtful to me, and there was nothing exciting or positive about them. I was sucked in by the allure of sheer, cold-hearted, emotionless reason and logic. It was something I could associate with, since I was already a bookish nerd, and sometimes kids even made fun of me because of it. And then there was Lord of the Rings, telling me that being a bookish person was not at all weak or laughable. Being a reader and an intellectual could mean I could be a Saruman figure. For the first time, I could relate to a character that showed me that such nerdy traits not only don't make you weak, but can also give you immense power. And eventually you could use that power to trample over anything and anyone who hurt you. And then there was this sense of an all-consuming purpose. As a kid in a shitty family, I was generally used to not expecting anything nice to happen to me. I was supposed to obey, finish school, finish university, then start working, and so on and so forth. And none of it made me feel happy. It looked as if my future was just one of fulfilling general expectations, with nothing remarkable on the way. And I didn't have any ideals or moral pillars to lean on. From an early age, I'd become an atheist, since the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, especially in the rural parts of the country, seems so obsolete and intellectually retarded, the local church to this very day is a ridiculously medieval institution. And if you're a person with a minimal amount of brains and critical thinking, the church tradition crumbles down before you like the stupid sheep mentality relic that it is. So no, I didn't have religion to lean on, and I also didn't have my own ideals at that point in time, because let's face it, who does in their teens? Now my pillars are art and creation and history and philosophy and astronomy, but I'm in my early 30s now. For a person to have an authentic individual sense of purpose and existence, you gotta reach your middle age. Otherwise you're just too young and inexperienced. So I was both vulnerable and without purpose. And the idea of Isengard gave me this feeling of a purpose, in which case it was literally unlimited power to exterminate your enemies and create a new world. I was obsessed with that idea. And mind you, you might say that's just some childish crap and not fascism. But let me say, as I understood it back then, it wasn't extermination for the sake of extermination. In my mind, it wasn't for evil. It was actually for good, because like in actual fascism, fascists don't think they're bad. They actually think they're perfect and the epitome of good. And when they do extermination, they don't necessarily do it because they like killing. They do it because in their mind, they're getting rid of defects in the system, so to speak. And wiping out defects makes the system even more perfect. And improving the system is good. So ultimately, by killing, you do good. And I had come to accept that. I used to imagine that one day I'd get into politics and be another Saruman, all reasonable, intellectual, all-powerful, and doing whatever was necessary in order to improve the system, killing people included. I imagined myself as the next Augustus or Marcus Aurelius, wearing a Saruman wig and staff, seeing the bigger picture and making the sacrifices for the greater good, the sacrifices including lives. And so, this was what got into my mind from the movies and the books. And then later on, it got worse, because of the computer games. Return of the King, which to this day is my most favorite game in the series, it didn't have the option to play the evil side, and so it never dawned on me that evil was an option. The story was about good winning over evil, and that was it. But then I started playing the Battle for Middle-earth, and there, you did have the option to take the evil side. And in those evil campaigns, you basically just pillaged and destroyed all of Middle-earth, and also killed everyone. And not just killed everyone, but also had a quote-unquote pleasure of experiencing killing civilians. Like when you start to take over Minas Tirith, little civilian bots start running out of it, and you can chase them and kill them. And there's the added sound effect of women screaming in horror as you do it. I remember being a little shocked when I played the Siege for the first time, because I was, as I am nowadays I'm glad to say, shocked at the thought that a computer game gives you the chance to experience mass slaughter of innocent people as a form of pleasure. And then I gradually became desensitized to it, and not only kept playing those missions, but started enjoying chasing after civilians and murdering them. And one might say, calm the fuck down. That was a computer game, and there's many like it. Which, yes, I know, but at the same time, if a game programmed my teenage brain to think killing innocent people is okay, whether in-game or potentially in the real world, I mean, how harmless is that? I'm very glad to say that I outgrew this Tolkien fascism in my teenage years, but then I'm horrified that I even had those thoughts in the first place. And all because of a fantasy game, or a book or film that I came across when I was vulnerable and impressionable. At this point in my life, I am of course grateful that it happened, because it gives me perspective and sheds light on the psychological wounds that I had as a child, and this is always therapeutic when it comes to healing from your past. I can safely say that nowadays, I'm the wiser for it. And not only personally, but also societally. Because if you've experienced this thing yourself, it's way easier to see it in others, even if they don't realize they have it. I see the seeds of fascism across all walks of life and society. All kinds of political movements and their fan bases, from the millions of Putin fans across Eastern Europe to the millions of MAGA sycophants in the West. I see it in religions as well, whether Christian churches or Muslims or Jewish crap. I see it even across academic fields such as history. Like every country's history has its share of insane nationalistic fanatics who ascribe to one conspiracy theory or the other, and whoever goes against them, they completely annihilate on social media or even threaten in real life. I see the seeds and signs of fascism everywhere, and to a large extent it's because I myself felt it at the time, through Tolkien and my obsession with Isengard. And in this regard, it did help me, but oh my god, am I still shocked at myself. And not just myself, but my teenage self. That's just insane. And I'm playing the damn game now, because I wanted to have a clearer memory of the experience, and words cannot describe what this game meant to me at the time. Just like nowadays, I live for my obsessions, which are art, creation, research, and so on. Back then, I lived for my obsession too, only that obsession was playing this game and watching these films and reading the books and imagining how one day I will have 10,000 orcs to attack people with. It just makes me shiver. And it goes to show, we have come to the modern moral consensus that harming and killing anyone is wrong, and yet we have those fucking mediums where we can still at least imagine we're massacring people. It's like we created our own vent, which prevents us from going out and actually massacring. It's like the churchgoer who says they only have morals and behave because they believe God wants them to. And if God's not real, then they won't have a reason to behave, so they'll start going around killing and raping. And that terrifies me and depresses me. It's like we're lying to ourselves in order to try and prevent the violence and destruction that's bubbling beneath the surface.